Okay, thank you so much for the invitation, and I will give this speak in English because I don't speak very much French anyhow. So I will talk about some vested interests in science, and I will, in this presentation, I will give the names. And all these persons have been confronted, actually, so they know about this, so it's nothing new to them. My interest in this field goes back to late 1970s, when I presented actually the first cases in the world of soft tissue sarcoma patients that had been using the Agent Orange stuff in Sweden, the same phenoxyherbicides that were also contaminated by dioxins, especially TCDD. And this provoked quite a lot of interest in the media, but also in the scientific world. This is a typical way of exposure. Here is the phenoxyherbicide 2,4-D, which they are pulling, and the spraying machine in the forestry, and you can see the flagman going with a red sign and showing where to spray or not to spray. And of course, this is a big issue in agriculture. We proceeded with case control studies on soft tissue sarcoma and malignant lymphoma and could show that these were associated with this kind of exposure, exposure to phenoxyherbicides. And there were other studies following that showed the same pattern. Of course, the Vietnam veterans, both in the United States and in Australia, were most anxious about these relationships, and also if Agent Orange did cause different diseases, including cancer. There was a royal commission set up in mid-1980s in Australia, and they came out with a report in 1985 which said that there is no health problems with Agent Orange whatsoever, not even with cancer risk. It was shown by the Vietnam Veterans Organization in Australia that Monsanto had submitted, their council had submitted a report to the commission where they did fight every finding of a cancer risk, including our studies. And by comparing the Monsanto submission and this report, we could see that it was actually copied into the report. I mean, the Monsanto wrote most of this chapter. We rebutted this, of course. We were very surprised when Sir Richard Doll, the well-known one from UK, sent a letter to the Commission and said that according to his opinion, our studies should no longer be cited as scientific evidence of a cancer risk. And he said even that TCDD, contaminating dioxin in phenoxyherbicides, is not carcinogenic. We approached Sir Richard and wrote a letter to him, and he said, I think that's okay what I'm saying. Why don't you pop in for lunch next time you come to Oxford? And I was also at an IARC meeting where I had the first talk and confronted him with this. He gave the next talk without acknowledging anything about what he did in Australia. So by an investigating journalist, Martin Walker, it was found out that he was on the payroll for Monsanto since 1979. Actually, at the time when he wrote The Causes of Cancer with Richard Peter, which Richard Clapp mentioned previously. So he was paid by $1,000 per day, and this was increased to $1,500 per day for his work for Monsanto. And of course, if he had reported this, it would have given another impact of what he wrote and what he said in different circumstances. So this is a conflict of interest that is not shown. Anyhow, there were lots of studies on dioxins and phenoxyherbicides, and as you know, TCDD was evaluated by IARC in 1997 as a complete carcinogen. So it was 20 years after our first case study of exposed cancer patients. There were, of course, also reactions in Sweden. Here we have a number of persons at the Karolinska Institute Hans-Olof Adami, which is a rather well-known epidemiologist, and also some other persons, Anders Ahlbom at Karolinska Institute, very much involved in the telecom issue now, and a couple of others. They wrote first a newspaper article and then also published this in Bioelectromagnetic Science newsletter about experts who talk rubbish. And I was one of the experts, although not named in the article, which was quite a rude statement and nasty thing of scientists. But I think that many scientists are not what we should think about them. We showed all these things in an article in American Journal of Industrial Medicine back in 2006, where we presented these details. Trikopoulos and Adami, they went also into the mobile phone issue. And back in 2001, INSCIP presented a study in the United States of mobile phone use and the risk for brain cancer. And as you can see here, there was an editorial in New England Journal of Medicine where these two persons say that this study allies fears raised by alarmist reports that the use of cellular telephones can cause cancer. But the latency period, the time of use, was only 5 years in that study. And as you can understand, it's not possible to make any conclusions with only 5 years use of a mobile phone if there's a cancer risk or not. So this was some kind to get rid of any discussion that there could be a risk. IARC, there were many studies coming up, like the Interphone study, for example, and our studies in that area too. And IARC had in May 2011 a meeting to evaluate the carcinogenic risk of radio frequencies. The chair was Jonathan Sammet from United States, and the epidemiology group was to be chaired by Anders Ahlbom from Sweden, the same Ahlbom who wrote the article about scientists who talk rubbish, and also who had declared, he was part of the Interphone study, he had declared before the study started that risk for brain cancer is biologically bizarre from mobile phones. It was only 1 day before the meeting started that it was revealed that Anders Ahlbom had a conflict of interest, because he was on the board of his brother's lobbying firm in Brussels, and he had been there for a while. And he had never declared this in any articles that he wrote, or he didn't declare this in the conflicts of interest statement before IARC. So he was actually refused to come to the meeting, and this was only the day before the meeting was to start. And I mean, he would have a very important position as the chair of the epidemiology group. As you know, the monograph came out and came to the conclusion that there is a group 2B, a possible carcinogenic effect by radio frequencies. And as you may know, this hasn't had any impact in the world on as to precaution. On the contrary, WHO stated in a fact sheet only some weeks after this evaluation by IARC that to date no adverse health effects have been established as being caused by mobile phone use. Tissue heating is the principal mechanism, the interaction between radio frequency and human tissue. So after all, IARC is part of WHO, so one has to ask what's going on and what are they doing within that agency. It has been impossible to get information about who has written this fact sheet at WHO. They haven't responded to those questions. Well, there have been several studies in this area. So last year we used the Hill viewpoints that were used for smoking and lung cancer. They discussed as an epidemiologist, we usually say it's an association and it's not a cause. But Hill created 9 items to discuss causation versus association. And we used these criteria by Hill, and we could show actually that most of these criteria were fulfilled, and that radio frequencies should be regarded as causing brain cancer, and according to IARC it should be group 1 instead of group 2B. Last year we published actually 5 papers on this issue. The first one was an overview of the present knowledge in that area on glioma and acoustic neuroma, and then we had 3 separate papers on acoustic neuroma and malignant brain tumors, and mostly glioma and also meningioma, and also this Hill criteria paper. This is what comes out then from the protection agencies in the Nordic countries. They presented this in December 2013, after the IARC decision, after, for example, our new studies. And they claim that the data overall on brain tumors and mobile phone use do not show an effect on tumor risk. So the problem is, how can they come up with such a conclusion with no discussion about precautionary principle? There is one problem with such statement, and it is, first, of course, that it's not true. The other one is that it gives a clean bill of health to the users and different authorities in these countries, because they rely upon the protection agencies. And if people complain, like several NGOs, they say, okay, we look into the website of this agency and they say there is no problem, so what should we do? This goes for Wi-Fi's in classrooms, for base stations, mobile phones, cordless phones, etc. And then there was another publication which was by Summit, who was the chair in the group, and 3 persons from IARC, and they come up with that the data do not really show an increased risk for brain tumors. SCANEER is something which is ongoing now, and they have come with a preliminary report that says that based on cohort and incidence data, there is really no increased risk for glioma, which is somewhat amazing. Kjell Hansson Mild in our group, who was part of that, he wrote a letter of complaint that this part was written by Joachim Schütz, and he didn't want to include any risk factors into the study, into their evaluation. So that's where it stands just now. They usually use the incidence of brain tumors in Sweden to say that there is nothing going on. This is the cancer data. But if you look into the hospital data, here are records on brain tumors in the hospital records in Sweden. The blue line is the increase of mobile phone use in Sweden, and the red one is the registration of brain tumors. And as you can see, since 2008, there is a sharp increase, which is significant, 4% per year more brain tumor cases, which is about a lag time of 4 years since the real increase in the use in 2004. And the same goes on for the death register, where there is a sharp increase of about 20% during the recent years. This is our new data on glioma risk, which shows that using the wireless phones cumulative up to 10,000 hours, and the bottom line gives an increased risk of about 3 for glioma. This is just published, and it's very significant. And also that the risk is highest for the ipsilateral use. You can see the red line, and it's significant, of course. Whereas on the contralateral use on the other side, then a brain tumor, the risk is much lower. And you can also see that there seems to be a late effect, a few years before the diagnosis. You see a curve up, and then of course that the risk increases with time. So it could be both an initiation and a promotion in these studies. So what's going on? Maybe it's lawyers who are doing the job. There are 2 cases in one in Europe and one in Israel with compensation, and of course this is going on in USA now after passing the FRI hearings. This is the last WHO statement, and it's also my last slide, which is just a few weeks ago. No adverse health effects have been established as being caused by mobile phones use. The most surprising statement by WHO: who are they protecting, public health or impressive industry? Okay, thank you. This was a very sharp presentation.